Hi everyone and welcome to the Merlin's Magic Workshop. My name is Jeremy and I hope you are doing well for this very last video of the series How to Paint Space Marines in Simplified Non-Metallic Metal. With this series, my goal was to show you a sort of minimalistic approach I use very often to create metallic effect. Of course, this is absolutely not the only way to proceed, but to me it works pretty well, especially for small scale miniature like 28 or 32 millimeters. I already published my recipes for main colors like blue, green, yellow, red, and more recently the black scheme. Everything is obviously available on my channel. Today I'm going to work on the white scheme, or close to white, some might say. It depends a bit on everyone's perception and interpretation. But in any case, I will show you all the steps to get to that result. As for the black NMM scheme, the main difficulty with white will be to find the right combination of tones, the right size for the reflections, and how the light is progressing inside of those reflections. The goal being to create the illusion of a white shiny surface while working only with gray tones. Another important point is to create a strong contrast with other parts of the miniature which have different colors. In today's video, I will mimic the white scars color scheme by introducing red on the shoulder pads and the aquila on the chest. The red will create nice temperature and saturation contrast that will help to better interpret the cold bluish gray as an actual reflective white. As usual, I will show you all the details of the paint job during the first 15 minutes of the video on the right leg, and then I will go more quickly over the rest of the miniature using the very same techniques. If you like this kind of videos and if you want me to make more, please like this one, subscribe to the channel and share on your social networks. You can also join me on Patreon using the link just below. It will give you access to a private Discord where we can chat about miniature painting. And of course, you can also find my work in progress and other hobby project on my Instagram page. Alright, so now let's get to the tutorial, and as usual, I will see you at the end for a last comment. Enjoy the video and see you after that. Okay, so let's start by building the color scheme. I will go first with the middle tones using steel gray, which is a very desaturated blue. For the shadows, I will use a combination of charcoal and steel gray. For the light tones, I'm gonna go with glacier blue, still a very cold tint, but I will then push towards off-white, a warmer tone that will help to intensify the light effect. Note that I'm using the old range off-white from Vallejo, as the new version is a bit too dark to my taste, but it can be corrected by adding a bit of pure white. Now that the color scheme is in place, I will show you the painting process, starting with the right leg of the miniature. Before anything, I apply the undercoat using a mix of 50% charcoal and 50% steel gray. Then I can start to lock in the primary reflection using pure steel gray. As usual, I go with the zenithal light configuration, which means that the main source of light is placed above and far away from the miniature. Primary reflections are important to indicate where this main light is located, so I tend to place them on the top of each part of the leg. I try as much as possible to create a line of light along the leg, so that all reflections are consistent with each other and they are all pointing to the same source of light. Concerning the shape of the reflection, I use a well-known simplification technique that consists of drawing circles on spherical shapes and rectangles on cylindrical shapes. Next, I will connect the highlight with the undercoat using a mix of 20% charcoal and 80% steel gray, and I will only work around the zone that I just painted before. If you already watched the previous tutorials, you now certainly understand how I like to proceed for creating these transitions. First, I work only with the basic layering techniques to establish the foundation of the gradient. The goal is to place the reflections quickly and properly, and then I will come back with more advanced techniques to refine the transitions. After that, I will work on the light tones using a mix of 50% steel gray and 50% glacier blue. Same places as before, but this time reducing the surface to paint. Then with pure glacier blue, I will paint even smaller light points to further push the contrast. The idea is to gradually lighten the reflection step by step with brighter and brighter tones, but still without worrying about the smoothness of the transitions. This is what I call the staircase gradation process. First, we lock in the light in a coarse but clean way to quickly visualize the global render, and then we take more time to smooth the transitions to obtain the final result. I then move to the secondary reflections, and I will use the same colors than before, but with only 3 levels of brightness this time, so without going up to the pure glacier blue. Secondary reflections represent the light that comes from the environment of the miniature, mostly from the ground actually. So I'm painting them on the inside part of the leg, oriented mostly toward the ground, and I still try to maintain the line of light to get consistent results. I won't push the highlights towards pure glacier blue as we did for the primary reflections. That's because secondary reflections are generally less intense, because they come from a secondary light that already bounced onto the environment before getting to the character. And finally, I move to the tertiary reflections, again using the same colors and the same process that I used before. Tertiary reflections are coming from the light that bounced on the armor and reached another part of this armor, so they mostly come from the places where primary and secondary reflections were placed. With that in mind, I draw the tertiary reflections in the zones that are facing the bright spots I painted previously. Now that all the reflections are in place and that all the staircase gradations are done, I can move to the blending step to smooth the transitions. To create a smooth transition, I go for the fat glaze technique, which corresponds to a paint consistency between the glaze and the layer. The goal is to pull the paint from one zone to another to blur the transition. But since it is still a semi-transparent consistency, we need to be careful with the direction in which we pull or push the paint. In general, there is much less pigment left at the beginning of the stroke and much more at the end of the movement when we take off the brush. So if my brush is loaded with the color number 2, for example, better to end the brush stroke in the zone number 2, not to leave any visible marks. The main idea is to pull the pigments by following small diagonals from zone number 1 to zone number 2, having paint number 2 on the brush. Then, with the brush loaded with paint number 1, I pull the pigment to zone number 1, but this time following the opposite diagonal to minimize the creation of visible strokes. I will repeat the same process 2 or 3 times until the transition line has almost disappeared. Finally, I will apply a standard glaze, so more diluted than for the fat glaze, over the entire transition. First with color 1 towards zone number 1, and then with color 2 towards zone number 2. The paints I selected for this scheme are quite flexible and easy to thin down, so there is no real issue to get the desired consistency like for the fat glaze or for the regular glazing techniques. It's not always the case though, especially with paints that are close to pure white, which are in general more translucent and that can leave brush strokes that are difficult to hide. There is no reliable way to explain how to thin down the paint. It depends on the type of paint, the brand, the range, and even sometimes the production batch. The best is to test by yourself and try to really understand how your paints work before going for an ambitious project. For those of you who carefully watch my previous videos, you probably noticed that I'm reusing, sometimes word for word, what I said already many times before. But it's not only because of my laziness, also because most of the workflow I'm showing here is the same as the one I used for the previous colors. Actually, the goal of this series is to establish a workflow that is consistent but flexible enough to be adapted to any color scheme, so that's why the explanations are almost the same through the entire series. Next, I will work on the lining. First, I go with 50% steel grey and 50% glacier blue on all the edges. Then I use pure glacier blue for the edges oriented toward the main source of light. And finally, I will use off-white to push the brightness for the edges that receive the more light, and I will also cover a bit of the main reflection areas to increase the contrast even further. With that done, the right leg of the Space Marine is now finished. And we can move quicker over the rest of the miniature. The technique is always the same. First we establish the simple staircase gradation, and then we smooth the transition using the fat glaze technique. The white armor is now finished and we can move to the other metals and other textures on the miniature. Let's start using my usual recipe for the dark NMM steel. For the base, I use heavy charcoal from the extra opaque range of Vallejo. Then I introduce a bit of electric blue to bring blue tones to the shadows. And for the middle tone, I add more electric blue. For the highlights, I will incorporate more and more white to the previous mix until I get a sort of light bluish grey. Finally, I smooth all the transitions using the fat glaze technique. I went for the same recipe for the bolt rifle. For the other metallic parts, I will use the same red NMM that I showed in the previous video. The idea is to use skin tone over a base of dark red, and then I cover all the gradients with a glaze of red-orange to bring more saturation. For the leather, I go with the classic reddish brown that I will highlight by gradually adding some white. And finally, for the eyes, I will create a classic lens effect with violet tones and the famous little white dot to make it look like transparent glass.
The miniature is finally done. It took me about 7 or 8 hours of painting, but as usual, it can easily be reduced to 5 or 6 hours with a bit of practice and optimization. You probably noticed that the painting process was quite similar to what we did with the blue and the green schemes. Build a simple staircase gradation, blend the transitions, and finally complete the lining with 3 levels of light intensity. This time we did not need to apply color filters as we did for the red, the yellow or the black schemes because we did not need to adjust the hue or the global luminosity. However, the metallic white effect strongly relies on the balance and the progression of the gray tones inside of the gradients. For example, combining blue tints in the middle tones with a warmer white in the highlights really helps to create subtle temperature and contrast that enhance the NMM effect. And of course, the rich red elements I added in the end helped even more to create the metallic illusion. Though if you think the result is not white enough, I think you can try to enlarge a bit the primary reflection so it covers more of the miniature. But at the end, I like this result as it is, and it's consistent with what we have done with the previous colors, both in terms of render and painting process. Anyways, I hope you like this video and I hope you really like the entire series on simplified NMM effect. I still have a lot of projects in mind for this channel, related to painting of course, but also creation of dioramas, advanced bases and other many things. I'm gonna work on that during holidays and I will try to come up with an interesting plan for next year. I will keep you informed, but if you have some ideas and suggestions, don't hesitate to use the comment section of this video. Until then, I wish you the very best, have a nice day and see you next time.